We are live. We are live with no one, so we'll wait a second. Oh, look, the 0 popped up. That's great. So, Jeff, we're going to be done so that everybody who comes on can watch the debate. We do not want to keep anybody. And in fact, we'll be done well before that. But people are starting to come in. So if you guys want to go into the comments and tell us where you're coming from, we would love to hear from you. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. Jeff, where are you?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so put them in the comments. We'd love to see where people are coming in from. And I'm going to get started. So today I'm here with Jeff Selingo, an award-winning journalist who has reported on higher education for more than 2 decades. Jeff is the author of Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions. So I want to just start because I feel like everyone knows your story by now, but that's not true. So tell us what you did for that year researching your book. And really, you own the information that all of us who have kids who are applying to college want to know. So thank you for being here with us tonight. So how did that year go?
The year went really well. I was inside the admissions process at 3 selective universities, Emory, Davidson, and the University of Washington in 2018 and 2019. I sat with them. I read applications with them. I sat in committee meetings with them, training with them, the so-called shaping process, which I wrote about in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago. So I spent that entire year. I also spent that year with high school students, 3 of whom I profile in the book, along with all the influencers on all these on this entire process, the rankings, the direct marketing companies, parents, counselors. So it's really kind of I immersed myself in this ecosystem of college admissions.
I would say you might be like the person with the most knowledge because everyone has their little silo that they're in and you got to see all of them.
I did get to see all of it. Obviously, admissions is not a system. It's still different per college, but liberal arts colleges largely operate the same. And I was at Davidson, big privates like Emory operate the same, and big publics like University of Washington. Obviously, each have their own like little ingredients that they change, but for the most part, I felt like I got to 3 different types of institutions, which I think was really important for this project.
Okay, so let's get to the topic at hand, which is the different ways that you can apply to college. So there's a number of different ways. They're always a little confusing. Can you tell us about them?
Yes. So there used to be, probably when most of us applied, something called just regular admission, right? You would submit your application in January. If you applied to a highly selective college, you found out usually at the end of March, and that was that. Other colleges have rolling admissions where if you applied in January, you might find out, like I did, like 4 weeks later that I got in. Now, and there's always been something called early admissions, but now early admissions has gotten not only bigger, but more complicated. So there's something called early decision, which is a binding decision. It allows you as a student to apply in usually early November, usually November 1. Sometimes some colleges are slightly different, but it's mostly November 1. You find out in December, usually around mid-December, and it's a binding commitment. You get in, you're in. Now, you may get deferred into a regular decision or you may get a rejection, but if you get in, it's a binding decision. There are actually hundreds of colleges that offer early decision, but it really only matters at the selective colleges, because if it's not a selective college, you're probably not going to apply early anyway. So it really matters at the top 50 or 60 schools, almost all of whom have early decision, and it's a binding decision. There's also something else called early action, which a number of other top colleges also offer. And sometimes, by the way, they offer both. Early action allows you to apply early and get an early return, meaning you either get accepted or rejected or deferred, but you don't, it's not a binding decision. You don't have to put down a deposit until later in May. So early decision, binding. Early action, not binding. Regular decision, January, you send in your application. Rolling admissions means you get a decision maybe in a couple weeks. Regular decision also can mean you get a decision at the end of March. And so most schools want to know if you're coming by May 1, but sometimes there's even something called late admissions, where you're allowed to submit an application after May 1. Those are schools that really just need to fill their seats. and they're still taking applications even in the summer.
Okay, so first I want to tell everybody who's on right now, thank you for being here. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments. We'll get to them later. So there's all of a sudden there was an early decision 1 and an early decision 2. So what's the difference between those two things?
So these rules are incredibly complicated. So some schools only have early decision and that's it. But some schools add something called early decision 2 that are perfectly timed for those students who have applied early decision somewhere else and find out in mid-December that they've been rejected and now have yet another chance, early decision 2, which is perfectly timed, usually deadline in late December, where they can throw in their application at another place if they've been rejected by early decision 1. This year, I'm also hearing some schools might add in early decision 3, probably in early January, and you might find out in mid-January if you got in. And the reason they're doing that is because they realize trying to decide whether to apply by November 1 is going to be really hard this year because you can't get to campus to take a tour, and you may not be able to kind of get everything together for November 1.
Okay, so what are the pros and cons of early decision?
Well, personally, I'm biased. I don't like early decision. I think it really moves up the college search process much earlier in a student's high school career. So in a normal year, you have to do so much more in your junior year to get prepared to submit an application on November 1, because in most years, you've only been in high school or senior year for 2 months by the time the deadline's due, or by the time the application is due. So the pros are, if you really know where you want to go, the search is over. You apply, you find out, you get in December, you're done. Obviously, you still have to go to school, high school, and get good grades in senior year. They will check those grades, but the process is essentially done. The other pro, and I believe now, and I point this out in the book, that it's not as much of a pro as it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It's slightly easier to get in early decision at more selective colleges. That has changed, though. As people started to believe that, more people started to apply early decision. So the more applications they get early decision, and they're not necessarily accepting any more, thus it's harder to get in. The other thing that's changed, and I point this out in the book, is that recruited athletes at most schools now come in early decision. So they fill a lot of the spots as a result. So it's not as easy as it once was. Still slightly easier. There's no doubt about it. The acceptance rates are higher in early decision. The cons, the biggest one is you can't compare financial aid packages. So if you are really going to depend on financial aid and you want to be able to get financial aid packages and offers from multiple schools and be able to play them off of each other and compare them, you're not going to be able to do that, because if you get accepted, it's a binding offer, you get their financial aid package. You could kind of get out of it. Some people do get out of early decision contracts by saying, I didn't get the financial aid I really needed, and this is what I expected. But for the most part, it's binding, and that means you can't compare it. It's a big con for many students who really depend on the financial aid package.
Can you really be forced to go to the school if you can't afford it?
So so what they're going to say, what these schools are going to say is, many schools will say, we're going to meet your financial aid, your financial need, as the CSS profile or the FAFSA, one of the financial aid forms you have to fill out for the school. We're going to meet your expected family contribution. Now, for some students, families think they deserve more than that, their expected family contribution. And that's why, in many ways, regular decision is better for them, because they might get more aid from some schools. As I point out in the book, I have this construct in the book called buyers and sellers. And in the book, I point out that some schools are buyers, meaning they really need students and they really discount tuition. They're still high quality schools, and you might be better off going to those schools and getting those financial aid packages. And again, if you apply early, not going to be able to necessarily compare those.
Is there less merit aid if you're applying early?
It depends. Some schools do offer merit aid even for early decision. But remember, most students applying early have the financial means to pay. And this is one of the reasons why schools love early decision. Usually the pool of students in early decision are wealthier and are willing to pay more money in order to get to go to that school. So if you really need financial aid, or you really want that merit aid, I would not apply early. I don't think it's worth the trade-off of possibly getting in, but giving up the right to really compare and leverage those financial aid offers.
Because you really can go to the school you really want to go to and say, I got a better offer here.
Yeah, you're going to get in. Yes. Are you going to get into that really highly selective college? It is much harder in regular decision. So you're probably going to have to give up on that early decision school. But I always question whether students are really in love with those schools, or they're just doing it because they think it's the easy way in to get to Dartmouth or Penn or whatever. In fact, so much during the reporting of this book, I found this out, where students knew they wanted to go early somewhere. They just didn't know where, because they were constantly trying to figure out, oh, can I get in there? Can I get in there? Well, to me, that defeats the purpose of early decision. Do you really want to go there? If it's all about, can I get in, rather than do you want to get in, or do you really want to go there? I think that really defeats the purpose of early decision, which means you're truly in love with the place. There's nowhere else you could imagine yourself. And I'm not quite sure that many students in October of their senior year, especially this year, by the way, when you can't get to campus, are really sure that that's the place they want to go.
All right. So everything you're saying has kind of been happening for many, many years. And now we've had this moment where every single thing has changed. Is it possible they'll want to take more early decision because they can guarantee a full class?
So, Susan, now that I said all that, you're absolutely right. And I think this is the bind that many families are in and students are in. They are definitely going to lean in more to early decision this year. If they accept 45% of their class early normally, they'll probably accept 50 or 55%. They're going to push those numbers as much as they can if they have the pool, because they want the certainty that comes with early decision. So now you feel like, well, I'm contradicting myself. I just said don't apply early, and now I'm telling you it might be even easier to get in early this year. Admissions is not fair. It really is driven by the colleges and their needs, not your needs. So I don't think you should be pressured into applying early decision by the colleges. If it's right for you and your family, if you're sure you want to go there, if you can afford it financially and you don't need to compare those financial aid offers, then go for it. But if you're not sure and you do need to apply for financial aid and you do need to compare those offers, I'm not sure it's worth the risk that you're going to take by applying early.
So it's typically the highly selective schools that are having early decision, right?
So more than highly selective schools have it, but at some schools, maybe 2% of the class is admitted. At very highly selective schools, more than half the class might be admitted early because there's so much pressure to get in.
So are some of those schools need blind?
Yes, and I think this is important in early decision. So if you need aid, and you're applying early to a need blind school that meets full need, and both of those things are important. Need blind, meaning they don't take financial aid into consideration in admissions. And if they admit you, they promise to meet your full demonstrated need. They're not going to gap you. In other words, they're not going to say, well, we only could give you, 50% of what you need. We're going to give you 100% of what you need. In that case, if they meet those two conditions, you may not get that much better of an offer somewhere else financial aid wise, especially if you are truly financially needy. Where this becomes a bigger issue are those families, and I know there's probably some on tonight, who make too much money to really qualify for need-based aid, but don't make enough to write that full check, right? Middle and upper middle class families where merit aid is going to make a much bigger difference in their life. And that is at those schools, early decision, need blind, that may just not be as good of a deal for them. So again, it really depends on your financial aid, on your financial background in terms of what is better for you in these situations.
Okay, we have a question from Jenny, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Jenny, do you mind rewriting that then we can share it and get your answer? Thanks. Okay, so we talked about it changing this year. Do you think enrollment in general is going to be higher, even if you're not early decision, because of the hit that many schools took this year with kids not going?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Susan. And normally when I'm talking to parents these days, they're very worried that that all these students who deferred, and by the way, it's not as many as we thought. Enrollments are down about 2.5% to 3% at four-year colleges this year. So it's down a lot less than I think was predicted back in the summer and spring. So not as many students deferred, but you might be worried, well, there's all these students from this year's freshmen who deferred and now are going to be freshmen next year instead. And they're going to take a spot from my son or daughter. Here's why I don't think that will happen. Two reasons. One is fewer students deferred. So it's not as big of a deal as we thought maybe a couple months ago. Second, colleges are really worried about, as you say, their overall enrollment. They need to maintain that overall enrollment, 5,000, 6,000 undergraduates. Yes, they look at individual classes, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior class. But if they have a smaller than normal sophomore class next year, they're going to want to make that up by enrolling more freshman students. Or they may want more money. So they're going to just enroll more students because they're going to want to get their more tuition dollars. So I actually would not worry about the enrollment picture at most colleges. In fact, I think you actually might be helped this coming year because I think they might want to accept more students than they normally would to make up for the losses of this year.
So what are the rules around like early decision? Is that the only place you can apply to? Could you also simultaneously do an early action or a regular?
So there are many rules, and you really should check with your high school counselor or the rules of the school. So if you apply early decision, you only can apply to one school early decision. And you have to wait. You're supposed to, now you can also apply to other schools' regular decision during that time. But if you get accepted early decision, you're supposed to withdraw your applications from those other schools. And sometimes schools talk to each other. They're not supposed to, but sometimes they do. And so this has happened before.
Wait, when you say sometimes, do you mean all the time?
All the time. Right. So this has happened. I know of schools where this has happened, where you got in early, say to Grinnell College, but you continue to apply, or you have applied to other schools and you don't withdraw them. And then Tulane accepts you in regular decision. And suddenly now you get a bundle of money from Tulane. And Grinnell might find out about that. In fact, sometimes they usually do. Counselors love to be loved by colleges. So your high school counselor might rat you out there a little bit. Oh. And Grinnell then will say, okay, sorry, you're no longer accepted here. We'll pull that back. And Tulane might also do the same thing to you. Schools don't like to step on each other's toes because they don't want to be on the other side of that. Yes, they might lose a student they really want it, but they don't want to, the urban myths that get around, you can really apply to multiple. They don't want that to happen because they don't want suddenly that to be a common practice. So kind of follow those rules. They're there for a reason. And there are people that know that you're applying to multiple schools. They're going to tell these other colleges about that.
So don't take the risk.
Don't take the risk. It's really not worth it.
Okay, so here we have a question from Jenny. Due to COVID, all SAT tests were rescheduled past the early admissions. Can applying with no test score to test optional schools cause a student to lose academic merit and aid? So
at test optional schools, if they're test optional admissions, they're supposed to be test optional in financial aid. I know there are schools out there saying they're test optional in admissions and they're not. They're still going to probably take testing into consideration in merit aid. Make sure you ask. By the way, if they're doing that, I think it's terrible. If they test optional admissions, they should be test optional for merit aid as well. What I'm hearing many schools are going to do is lean much more into GPA this year. They're also going to be looking more at the application materials otherwise. So they're not going to use test scores in merit aid. My advice to you is if the school's test optional, trust it. If you can't get to a testing center, if your testing keeps getting canceled, don't worry about it. Apply. They're going to have so many students apply without a test score this year. They're going to have to take those students into consideration, both in admissions and for merit aid, because they simply won't have enough students otherwise, because they're going to have so many students who are going to be applying without those test scores this year.
Okay, here's another question from Alan. If you are a strong candidate with strong test scores, is there a benefit to do early action besides just knowing earlier?
No, there isn't.
That was easy. Okay, here's this one from Sheetal. Do you think international student enrollment will be lower? And would that open up more spots for U.S. citizens?
Yes and yes. I really do think that we already know international enrollment is down across the board, and that will open up more spots for U.S. students this year. There's no doubt about it. Again, because they're going to want to try to increase their enrollment as much as possible.
Okay, here's Karen. Oh, I lost her. Sorry. Yeah. What? Okay, I'm having trouble with Karen. Sorry.
Oh, there. Oh, you almost had her.
I almost had her.
There you go.
Not touch anything. What is your best piece of practical advice for high school seniors regarding taking a year off or going to a community college for a couple of years?
So if you're going to quote unquote take a year off, my best advice is make sure you do something with that year. So whether that's this year or next year, or whether you graduated in 2020 or graduating high school in 2021, make sure you just don't sit at home. In other words, right? Get a job, which is probably pretty difficult in this economy. Engage in some sort of coursework, whether that's at your local community college or online. So engage in some way, because colleges are going to want to make sure that you just didn't loaf around for that year you had off. I think community college is a great option, especially if you're not unsure what you want to do. You don't really like the online experience at the 4-year college you really wanted to go to. I think I would just ensure that you could transfer the courses you're taking at community college. But I think community college is a great option, particularly for those students who aren't quite sure what they want to do. It's a great way at a very low cost to experiment a little bit, to take a bunch of courses. And especially right now where you might not be on a residential campus anyway. So you're not really losing that part of the experience at a 4-year college.
Okay. Maria says, I am currently filling out an application for the National College Match by Questbridge. If I don't get accepted to colleges through Questbridge, can I still apply to those same colleges separately, either early action or regular decision, with a chance of getting in?
Yes. And in Questbridge, by the way, most often your application rolls over if you don't get matched, and they will. And I saw this at Emory and Davidson. I'm pausing there because I'm not quite sure if Davidson is a part of Questbridge, but I think it is. But I know I saw this at Emory where students who were not matched in Questbridge came through the regular application field and were looked at that point, either accepted or denied. I will tell you, college admissions officers really like the Questbridge application. It's a more detailed application than the Common App, especially around activities where students are able to talk a lot more about the activities they really care about. So if you want to apply to that school, even if you weren't matched, go right ahead.
Okay, Lee has a question that was sent in earlier. Can a student who takes community college credits in high school gain advantage in the admissions process? So those dual enrollment programs in high school.
They don't necessarily gain advantage. And I will tell you that some colleges are a little skeptical of dual enrollment courses because they don't think they may be as rigorous as AP courses. The nice thing they like about AP or IB, International Baccalaureate degree, is that there are standards around it. AP, you have to take this nationally normed test, where in dual enrollment, you're usually relying on the local, typically community college that you're taking the courses from. So it doesn't help you. And in fact, in some cases, it might hurt you if they don't think those courses were rigorous. In other words, if you took those dual enrollment courses instead of taking an AP or IB course, they're definitely going to be seen as lower among those three types of courses.
Okay, Maria wants to follow up and just ask, would she have to apply again after the Questbridge, or does it automatically go into the...
I think it differs by school. She would have to check with the school that she wants to enroll with.
Okay, here we have Malin again. How much does being a national merit semifinalist or finalist help your application?
It depends on the school. Some schools, like the University of Oklahoma, for example, for years now have had a kind of a institutional priority to have more national merit finalists as part of their class. So those schools that really tout that, it does help. Most schools, it doesn't.
Okay, this is a funny start to the question. Be honest. How important is the college essay? Who are the people in the colleges who read them, and how much time do they dedicate to each one?
Well, if you read the book, I'm really honest about this. They don't spend as much time as teenagers spend writing them, drafting them, editing them, hiring essay coaches. Now, that might change a little bit this year. Without the SAT, admissions officers are going to have to lean into a couple of other things. And one of those things might be the essay. But trust me, I've sat in and I read these essays. They're numbingly similar. And that's no offense against teenagers, but you've had 17, 18 years of your life. I also think that too many teenagers worry about what the admissions officer might want to read, and they're always guessing. And so the essays are kind of flat and boring. Write about something that really interests you, something that happened to you that's just a slice of life. One of the best essays that we read at Emory the year I was there was about how this student talked about how they were going to miss home, and they wrote it through a morning debate around orange juice, pulp or no pulp. And that was the lens of the debate, of this essay that was really about going away to school and missing home and missing this kind of a debate that people might see as kind of ridiculous, but this whole idea of pulp and no pulp. It was just a kind of an interesting slice of life story, well written, that people remembered. But in no case does an essay alone really help a student. I saw it at Davidson, where it was kind of a fascinating story about a student who was in Thailand and was a caregiver for an elephant. Those are sometimes exotic stories that sometimes could turn admissions officers off especially if the student doesn't realize the privilege that they may have had in telling that story. But for the most part, tell the story, be honest, write it in your authentic voice. The more they're coached, the more that admissions officers see it.
Okay, so should you write about COVID? That's the first question. And then the second question is, Common App now has a section to write about COVID. That part. Is that optional? And can kids really feel like it's optional if it is in fact optional? Because it's so hard to look at an application and not feel like you have to fill
I know. Don't feel like you have to fill in every blank on the application. I saw this with activities, right? There's 10 blanks for activities on the Common App. You don't have to fill in every single one. Just because you're missing one or two doesn't matter. COVID. So here's my advice on the COVID question. Now you're going to get different advice on this. So I'll tell you that right off the bat. On the COVID question, unless it really impacted you, you can skip it. And when I say impacted you, negatively, it could have impacted you. Maybe you had a death in the family, or somebody got really sick, a parent lost a job. I think that's a pretty big impact. Or it could have impacted you in another way. You had a younger sibling and they were home from school and you had to help homeschool them, right? So that actually is a good inspirational story that you could use that question for. I would not write about it in the main essay. By the way, use the main essay for other stuff. Think about the application as a full story about your life, and you don't want to use the same spot for two things. The other thing in terms of school in general, that's going to be addressed elsewhere. Your counselor recommendation, we'll talk about that. Your high school profile, which talks about your high school, will have information about that. So don't feel like you have to use that COVID question. I would also not use this COVID question to say, oh, woe is me, COVID-19, I was going to be captain of the football team, or I was going to be president of the senior class. And I know the coronavirus is terrible for all of us. I don't think admissions officers really want to hear about the chance you missed out on when we have 200,000 people dying and all this other economic upheaval. I don't really think they want to hear that. So be careful on how you use that question.
Mari wants to know if you know anything about MIT in terms of QuestBridge. Do you know?
No, I don't. Sorry.
So Mari, you're going to have to go search it out yourself.
Ask them.
Search it out yourself. And Jenny has a question. With colleges needing to make up lost income from this past year, is there more room for negotiation and merit offers? If you get a better offer from another university, does it make a difference if it's a private university or a state school in negotiating?
So some state schools don't give out merit aid to out-of-state students, particularly. Some schools do. University of Alabama, for example, gives out a lot of merit aid to out-of-state students. So it depends that so public college, private college really depends on their merit aid policies. Do I think they're going to offer more merit aid this year? I think some schools that had that didn't make their class, and you could really try to figure that out. Look at multiple years of the common data set, which are on every college's website. Just Google, or not almost every college's website, Google common data set, that college, look back multiple years, try to figure out some of their trends in their freshman class. And if you see they had a big dip last year, that might mean that they need to make up the class this year, and they might offer more merit aid. It's not a rule of thumb, though. Just because they missed a class, colleges most worry about their revenue. So if they're going to spend more money recruiting more or enrolling more students, they'd rather actually have a lower enrollment and not spend as much money. So it's a careful, delicate and balancing act that they have. But for the most part, I think they're going to need to spend more in merit aid this year to attract students. Another reason why, going back to our early decision conversation, you might be better off sticking around longer in the spring to see what kind of offers they're going to make.
Okay, here's my last question, and then we're going to let everybody go watch the presidential debates. But test optional it's so hard to trust it. And the tests are starting up now, and kids had prepared and been disappointed and prepared and disappointed. At this point in time, would you encourage somebody who's applying to a test optional school to go out there and take the test?
No, not this year particularly. I know it's really hard to trust. But University of Chicago, most selective college that's been test optional for many years. In a normal year, 85% of students submit test scores. I get it. In that year, you're going to want to submit a test score. But the dean of admissions at University of Chicago told me he's projecting maybe only 50% of their pool this year will have a test score. They can't select a class on 50% of the pool. They're going to have to really trust everything else that comes with the student's application this year. So I know it's hard for parents to believe that test optional means test optional. And I might even give you that in a normal year. This is not a normal year. If you could take the test, sure, go take the test. But here's one other thing to remember about the SAT. Normally, and this has been proven by research, normally the more you take the SAT, the higher you score. We also know that students are allowed to super score, meaning allowed to pick their best scores. You might be able to take the SAT once this year, but I highly doubt you're going to be able to take it multiple times this fall, which means you may not get your best score anyway. And that's probably what you're going to want to put forward. So just because you can take a test doesn't mean you're going to love that test score. I would focus on things you could control. Focus much more on your senior year. Focus much more on your essay. Focus much more on getting those recommendations from your teachers and from your counselors. That's a lot of energy that you have to expend doing all that stuff this year because of the coronavirus, and you might be remote. Spend that energy doing that, less on focusing on trying to find a testing center.
Okay, you're on the East Coast, I'm in the Midwest. Is it the same story for ACT?
Yes, it's very hard. I mean, in some cases, you might be able to find a testing center that's open. And by all means, if you can take the test, if you think you're going to do really well on it based on your practice tests, go for it. But I don't think it's really that necessary, especially for seniors. Now, you may have some juniors on here. Wait till the spring. I have a feeling, given where the things are going with the virus, you might have more opportunities, especially since the limited number of tests they're trying to get in seniors' hands anyway. So you're going to probably have a better chance of taking it in the spring anyway.
Okay, I want to say that Who Gets In and Why is just actually a fascinating read. I don't have a kid going into college anymore. All my kids are either in or out. And it's just a really excellent read. So I encourage all of you to get it. And Jeff Selingo, again, thank you so much for being here with us.
Susan, it was great to be with you again. And thank you so much.